So I was thinking, where are they getting the extra carbon from? Like, how are they doing this? Limestone, it has to be mined. They say, oh, there's no fossil fuels involved. Well, what are you fueling your tractor and your mining equipment with, right? Oh, fossil fuels.
Welcome to Water People, a podcast about the aquatic experiences that shape who we become back on land. I'm your host, Lauren Hill, joined by my partner, Dave Rastovich. Here we get to talk story with some of the most interesting and adept waterfolk on the planet. We acknowledge the Bundjalung Nation, the traditional custodians of the land and waters where we work and play, who have cared for this sea country for tens of thousands of years. Respect and gratitude to all First Nations people, including elders past, present, and emerging. This season is supported by Patagonia, whose purpose-driven mission is to use business to save our home planet. Today, we're in conversation with an underground legend of our global surfing community, Dr. Sarah Gerhardt. Besides being a professor of chemistry, Sarah was the first woman to ride one of the world's most feared waves, Mavericks in Northern California. Sarah recently featured in the groundbreaking documentary, The Big Sea, that's SEA, where she explains the chemical composition of neoprene, the material almost all of our wetsuits have been made of until very recently. She takes us through the surprising chemistry and the big impact seemingly small choices can have on our world. We always begin the podcast by asking about a time or experience after which you were never the same. Would you be willing to share a moment like that from your own life, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had the joy of growing up near the water and being in the water multiple times when I was young. My dad, who is an astronomer, loved to go to the Big Island. And so we lived on and off on the Big Island and camped on the beaches. And so I have a lot of memories of just being able to play in the water. But it wasn't in Hawaii. It was actually in Morro Bay, kind of a small town with not very good surf. Sorry to say. There's some good surf elsewhere, but I was with a friend, and my friend's mom's boyfriend had a surfboard and a wetsuit that was much too big for us. But he dropped us off at the beach, and it was kind of cold and foggy. And as typical, it's think short period, 10-second, maybe 11-second swell period. Small, but consistently wind swell, slap, 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 beach break. And my friend and I played in the water, froze for hours. And it was an incredibly pivotal moment for me because I literally forgot everything on land. And that was so important. It was, I had a hard life. So finding this place of being in the water and being completely focused on the moment and every little wave. I actually never caught a wave or stood up. It was mostly just pushing this board over the swells and laughing. I got hit in the head. I remember that. And I came back to the beach, and when I went home that night, I said, Mom, I really want to learn to surf. I want to get a surfboard. I want to get a wetsuit. My mom was able to reach out to my dad. He was a merchant marine, so he sailed and wasn't home very often. And at that point, my mom and dad were divorced anyway. So she reached out to him, and she said, yeah, Sarah wants a surfboard, and she wants a wetsuit. So he gave us the money to get, for my 13th birthday, a surfboard and a wetsuit. And that all spurned from that moment of playing in the water, this big board, freezing my butt off, and just being wow, in the moment. So that's basically what started my whole life of surfing right then.
Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. It's really amazing how often we chat with friends or have this scenario happening where we're recording a conversation where it's actually physically a small moment. We're not, climbing Everest or anything. We're just going to the beach. You were just jumping over waves. You were just playing in that space, but that was enough. Has your journey since then with surfing and the wave zone changed that much? Do you still go there to feel that thing where you get in the water and you forget everything?
And that's the magic of it, right? I think for me, surfing all along the way has brought me so much joy, and it's been so pivotal to kind of bringing me in the present moment. because I tend to be a person who is thinking 10 steps ahead, carrying all my burdens, juggling everything. I have a lot of expectations, and the water's a place where I just leave everything on the land and just go out and am free and can play. I get to learn who I am. It's a really incredible mirror to who I am as a person, who I want to be. Besides maybe yoga and my faith practice, that's the most incredible or important aspect of surfing in my life. So I seek the same thing every single time, actually. Yeah.
And do you find that experience of presence is especially heightened in heavy water?
Yeah, so I think when I look at why I continue to go further and further and further out and bigger waves, in part I was seeking solitude, because where I was learning to surf, when it got big, the crowds diminished. That was important to me, just to have that solitude. And also, as life got more and more challenging, the bigger the surf was, the more heightened my personal present focus was. So that's part of it. And I just have a lot of curiosity too. I was always curious about what's that out there. So if I went to Point Break and I was at one peak, I'd always be looking, what's that out there? What's that out there? I want to go. I'm just curious, So I had to satisfy my curiosity and then also find solitude and find that present moment. And certainly bigger waves heightened that focus. Yeah.
I read somewhere that you fell in love with chemistry because of the periodic table and and chemical nomenclature. That might be true, but you just said it is. I'm glad, because you can't believe everything you read on the internet. But it made me wonder what it was about the periodic table that was so attractive to young Sarah. You mentioned that you had a lot of hardship in your young life. You've spoken publicly about your family's struggle with poverty and homelessness. And I wonder, was it the predictability and the certainty of the physical principles of chemistry that offered a sense of stability for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that was really important to me as I was growing up was to find stability. And when I was in middle school, so I had gotten my surfboard, and I was trying to surf. And unfortunately, I had followed a person out in the surf, and I didn't understand how the currents and everything worked. And I was sold a 6'2", Almeric, beautiful board if you know how to surf, but if you've never surfed before, a little challenging. And I jumped off into an outlet in Morro Bay, and I jumped off into a rock, and the back half of my board, the tail was totally broken, and I was just distraught, and we didn't have the money to fix it. So I literally didn't get back in the water for almost another year. And with a fixed board, and so I was learning to surf, and we'd been evicted from where we lived. And so we were living this kind of makeshift place, lived in a motel for a little while. And then I got really sick, and I was hospitalized for a couple months. I missed a lot of school, and finally got into some stability. And entering my sophomore year of high school, I had a really amazing chemistry teacher. And the thing that was just so beautiful to me is I could see the puzzle pieces coming together. And yes, the halogens. So the halogens are on the right side of the periodic table. And halogen means from the sea. So Genesis, halo, sea. And that's where we find chloride, bromide, iodide, right? And how do they react with the other side of the periodic table, the alkali metals? Oh, sodium, chloride, 1-to-1 ratio. Oh, I got it. It somehow clicked in my brain, and I wanted to know more. I was like, no, this is some mystery of life, the fundamental mysteries of life. And yeah, that really piqued my curiosity. And it was a good thing. And I think that this is really important in general, is that when we have positive feedback, I figured out the nomenclature, and then I was rewarded for that. I can do something finally. And then I figured out the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And it was rewarding, and I was rewarded for it. I got chemistry student of the week, every week. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to major in chemistry. Let's just say it got a lot harder after that. But that was so interesting to me. And what's interesting now, I'm teaching general chemistry, and I'm teaching basics general. So everything in general about chemistry. And now I see that there are actually more exceptions to rules on the periodic table than there are actually rules, which is super interesting.
Wow.
It's like, why is mercury a liquid at room temperature? It's the only metal that is, right? How do we explain that from a quantum mechanical perspective, and what's going on? There's just an unending mystery and figuring things out and enjoyment in the elements and chemistry.
Now that's fascinating, because Laura and I were just talking earlier about that certainty that she was mentioning with the table and with these foundational elements of life that you are looking at, you understand. I don't. Maybe one day I will, but it's wonderful to speak with someone who does. But we're talking about that certainty, and we live in such a fluid, changing, uncertain world and time. And how do you feel knowing now that there are those exceptions to the rules, that fluidity happening? Are you able to deal with that level of, I guess, unpredictable nature there, considering what drew you to that focus with chemistry was the predictable nature of it?
That's a really good question. And I think age has helped, realizing that the farther out you go, the deeper the water, right? So now I realize that there's less I actually know than I thought I knew back in the day. And that's been actually extremely unsettling, and at the same time, really incredible, because I can just go, I'm right here, right now. Open-handed living. I don't have to grasp super tight. When you grasp the sand, it falls through your fingers. But if you're open-handed, living in that present moment now, in more aspects of my life than I'm just going to serve to be in the present moment, I can remind myself constantly, I need to be in this present moment, because the reality is we don't have control. Control is an illusion. And there's so much we don't know. There's so much mystery. And I can be okay with that.
That's wonderful. That sounds like when you're in the flats and you're in between the peaks of wavelengths, and you're down there in the trough and you've copped one on the head, maybe one or two, and you got another one coming. But you're okay with where you are.
Yeah.
And that's only really, you only get to learn that skill through going through that, and having that level of comfort.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's only until, and it takes time. It takes time, as we learn and as we grow. And there's something called the zone of proximal development. And it's that zone between, I'm comfortable here. This is what I know. And out here is going to blow my circuits, and my brain's going to shut down and freak out. But in between, that's the zone of proximal development. In between is this sweet spot where we can reach out and take a risk and learn something and realize, oh, I made a mistake, but wow, I learned something. And then the continually staying in that zone, we expand. And that takes time, and it takes forgiveness for yourself, and it takes trust in the people who are teaching. And it's a long process, and sometimes there's just challenges that we have to face in order to figure it out. And I think one of the ways we teach chemistry, almost kind of like teaching surfing, where you're like, okay, this is the safe zone, this is your entrance, this is your exit, right? This is a safe zone. And I kind of teach the same thing to my students. I'm like, this is what you can handle right now, and there's just other really cool stuff later. If you get to go on, you're going to learn about it. And I'm just going to tell you that most of the rules I'm telling you right now, they're going to tell you next class, that stuff you learned, throw it away. We're going to try something new. Wow. But we have to start from the basics, right? And by the way, sodium is always +1 and chloride's always -1. So sodium chloride is always sodium chloride. So that's cool. We're safe in the ocean.
that's something to hang your hat on.
That's cool.
Now, is that term proximal development, is that a chemistry term? Does that come from that world?
Actually, no, it's a pedagogy term. It's teaching. So when we learn how to, so when I did my PhD in chemistry, I just studied chemistry, right? I studied how light and matter interact, and did a thesis and published stuff, and then I got a PhD, and then that all of a sudden qualified me to be a teacher. But the only way that I knew how to teach was to copy the people in front of me, that were my teachers. And sometimes teaching in the same method that has been used forever and ever, works for some people, but not a lot of people. So I started learning basically kind of the way they teach high school teachers and elementary school teachers. If you want to get a credential to teach, you have to go through all these education classes, right? And so I started going to education classes and learning how we learn. And that term, the zone of proximal development, that safe zone, is actually a term from education.
Wow, it's fantastic.
Not from chemistry.
That's one of the better definitions of surfing I think I've ever heard. That's the wave zone. That's that realm right there.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Sarah, you've been surfing Mavericks for 25 years now. I'm a big fan of really intimately knowing the places where I surf. I know not everyone's like that, but I really love to know the different moods of a place and to develop a relationship with it. Is it like that for you with Mavericks, and what is it specifically that calls you there and speaks to you?
Yeah, so Mavericks was a place that I went. So before, probably about 93, I think, the year that, 1993. Last decade, last century. That was the year that I saw a picture of Jay Moriarty on the cover of Surfer magazine, and kind of just Mavericks itself blew up, and Mark Fu drowned in 93 or 94, maybe the same year. And I had a surfing injury. I'd gone to Oahu for the first time by myself, and I had my 7.4, my gun, and I'd gone out and surfed Sunset, caught a couple of waves. I mostly spent the entire time underwater, and I was like, this is great. I want to surf big waves. So I had come back and was out, and it was big enough at the rock that nobody else was out, and it was breaking kind of far out. And I dropped into a wave, but didn't quite make it. So I just destroyed my neck, and I hadn't been surfing for several months and couldn't really run or anything. And then I was seeing wow, look at all these incredible waves. I want to surf big waves. I want to go to Mavericks. So a couple of years later, I was almost done with college, and I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. And I drove up from San Luis Obispo area up to Pillar Point, and I was scoping out where is this wave, right? Trying to figure it out. And that was the first time I had seen the area and seen the setup. It's really incredible. And there's this giant headland cliff, and can look down at Mavericks from either the north end of it, and then there's Kelly's Cove, or you can walk out, climb up this cliff, and look kind of straight on at it. But I didn't know about that. I found the one where you look at the north end, and it was pretty far away. But I could see these large rocks, right? They're, I don't know, 20, 30 feet high that the waves were breaking into. And I was like, oh, that's intimidating. I definitely need to go out with somebody who knows the place and not try to get out there by myself. I had actually called Richard Schmidt, and I was like, yeah, so my name's Sarah, and my friend Ken told me I could call you. And he was like, who are you? You want to do what? He still remembers that. It's so funny. I didn't end up going out surfing there with him. As a matter of fact, I graduated. I figured out where I wanted to grad school, in part based on the fact that Santa Cruz is pretty close to Mavericks, right? And I was dating a friend of mine that we'd been friends for years on Oahu, and he was really good friends with Jay Moriarty, and he's like, I want to surf Mavericks too. I said, well, marry me and let's go to Santa Cruz. He's like, okay. So he did. And we moved to Santa Cruz. I know, it was so funny. I actually got him when he was down. He was super seasick, and he was bedridden. That's when I asked him. That's how you get him.
That's the useful information we were wanting out of a conversation like this.
So yeah, we moved here, and then within a month of moving here, Jay called Mike, and he's like, it's going to break, let's go. So I went up, and I was on one of Mike's smaller boards. Not small. I mean, he's about 50 pounds heavier than me. So it was a 9.6, and he was on a 10-footer. And so Jay and Mike and I went up together, and Jay was doing the hey, this is where the paddle out is. These are the rocks, but he didn't really stay behind to tell me this is the lineup and look around. So I just explored, right? I love to explore the moods. Where's the safe zone? What does it do when the swell's out of this angle or that angle? What does it do when, the period's different? What does it do when the wind's different? So yeah, we went up there, and it was way heavier than I was prepared for. unfortunately, I had was just completely buried in the PhD program. It was super gnarly. And I wanted to do well in that. So I didn't surf. I was just like, study, study, study. And so when it came time to actually be out at Mavericks, I was just pretty much blown away. I mean, have you guys been there? Have you surfed there?
I've been there, but I haven't surfed it.
Haven't surfed it.
Okay. So one of the challenges in getting out there, if the swell is the right angle and the tide's right and the swell, height is big enough, is that you have the Mavericks Reef is kind of like a hand, and then there's this little mushroom rock that sticks off of it, and then there's this gap where it's a little shallower, and then there's another reef, Blackhand Reef. And to get out between Mushroom Rock and Blackhand Reef, you have to basically dodge, overhead surf that's just coming from all these different directions pretty consistently. So it'll catch wind swell stuff, and just trying to paddle out, I just got my butt kicked. And I finally made it through, to the outside where it's deep and it's kind of safe where the boats sit. And whoa, that was heavy. And then to actually see it breaking, it was just so heavy. And so Mike and Jay went over and got waves right away. And I was like, I'm just going to sit here on the shoulder. And I watched for a very long time. And then I went out again. I used a different board, a friend's board. That was the time I went out, and Frosty, Jay's mentor, had paddled out, and he was watching me, and I was just watching everything, okay, where's the lineup? Trying to figure out way on the hills, way far away, where you line up what antenna with what tree, and right? And it changes a lot. There's the bowl, and then there's the lates bowl or the chicken bowl, right? The shifters, which stand up really straight, but they tend to be a little bit more flatter on the face. It'll pitch right at the top, and okay, you lose contact right at the top, but then it's a little smoother where the bowl is just super pitchy. So I was just trying to figure it out, and Frosty broke his board that day, and then on the way home, he stopped by Bob Pearson's, and Bob said, hey, I'll make you a new board, and how'd it go? And Frosty's I just saw the first woman who's going to surf Mavericks. I saw her out in the water, because he saw me how does this place work? How do I do this? And I paddled for a couple on the shoulder and looked down and went, ooh. And so unsuccessful. But then I went to Bob's, and I had a board made for myself, and then was able to go out my third time out on my own board that was, made just for me. And I was able to catch my first wave. And so I caught a bunch more waves. And then every year after that, Mike would go up 10, 15 times, whatever. And I'd be able to go 4 or 5. And then, just learning oh yeah, I'd rather surf it on a tide coming in. I'd rather definitely not on a south wind. We paddled out a couple of times thinking maybe we could pull it off. It was Volkswagen Bug, moguls coming up the face. It's So we figured it out. And the minimum time it breaks, can you pull it off on this? And, local winds, and it's super fascinating and incredible in different moods every single time, which makes it fun, right?
Yeah.
That's why we keep going back, right? It's it's never the same. So.
You've spoken about, I heard you recommend the book Spark, and the way it traces the neurochemical impact of exercise. And you've talked about how you specifically use surfing, or maybe in the book it talks about using surfing or exercise to combat anxiety and fear. Fear, of course, can create flight response or fight response, and others as well. How have you gone about preparing yourself for the work of wrangling fear in heavy water situations? And I wonder, is our fight or flight response, whether we choose fight or flight, is that genetically predetermined, or is it workable? And how have you worked with it, if it is workable?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we all have an innate intuitive, hardwired, save yourself function, right? We all have that. So in that sense, the sympathetic nervous system response to stimulus, right, is genetic. We all have it. Now, whether or not we grow to be anxious people or fearful people, or how we deal with fear, has a lot to do with the nature component. So we can have, like if you think of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it can come because you were robbed or there was this massive event in your life, this massive trauma, or it can just be a series of perceived states of helplessness. That's it, right? So death by paper cut, right? Nature has a huge impact on our what's called our vasovagal response, right? Our nervous system and how we perceive potentially dangerous situations, right? And then how we respond. So part of the fear response, it can be fight, flight, freeze as well. So freeze is one of them. So part of that response is that release of cortisol, right? The cortisone, the stress hormone. And that can build up in our bodies and it can cause inflammation. It can cause, which is probably one of the worst things, right? It can cause people to kind of just get stuck in anxiety mode and fear mode, right? So I think that the interesting component of the book Spark that really helped me dealing with my anxieties, like the daily stuff, and then the anxiety of surfing, was to reduce that cortisol level. The research showed that if we can get our heart rate up to about 80% and kind of maintain it there for a little bit, that's the point at which our body begins to use up the cortisol and that stress hormone and kind of reset, right? Mm-hmm. So there's always the physical aspect of using up the stress hormones to reset and to come back down. So when I have students come to me who say, I knew everything, I got to the test, and I forgot everything. I'm like, oh, that's a totally normal fear response. Because what's happening, our brains can't tell the difference between a lion and a test, right? So the lion is super stressful, and I'm not going to sit there and figure out how many miles per hour I have to run. If he jumps at this angle, I'm not going to be solving math problems. I'm just going to run, right? And my students are doing the same thing. So all the fear response, the shunting of the blood to the vital organs, you're losing the blood in the front of the brain, basically. Executive function going down, short-term memory going down. You're going right back to get the hell out of here. And that's what happens to my students. So I tell them, look, before you come to the test, we have a really big hill right behind our classroom. I said, go up the hill a couple of times. Get that fresh blood to your brain. And that's that physical component of dealing with stress and dealing with anxiety. And for me, I go surf as much as I possibly can. And I push myself. If I'm not surfing, then, I'll go out on a mat. I went for a mat session this morning, right? Great exercise. I can skid across the kelp. I can be where nobody else is. And I can just laugh and just giggle. It's super fun. But I'm helping my body work through the stress. I have a lot of stress, right? And then weird anxieties too. So my body is just doing that. And then there's that other aspect that's super important. That's the aspect where we train our brain. And that training our brain in part is practicing, is visualization. And when we get in those dangerous situations, like wanting to go surf big waves, right? And the brain's starting to freak out. Obviously it's there to save my life. I don't want to shut it down. I'm not talking about not having a proper risk assessment, right? There are days when I look and I'm like, I'm not going out there. I'm not doing that because it's not my day to do that. But there are other days when I'm like, yeah, I want to go do that. And how do I deal with that? Well, I remind my brain, hey, I can hold my breath. Hey, I've been training like this forever. Hey, I can do this with my eyes closed. It's okay. And I'm listening to you, brain. I'm listening. I'm aware. I'm not just going to shut you down. So just chill out a little bit. So it's getting to the anxiety through the practice and the visualization and the talking to. So there's that mental component and then there's that physical component. And you can get to anxiety both ways. I really think we need both. Because some people can just completely dive into, the physical running away from actually what's going on in life. And, then they lose their relationships and they lose whatever, because they have to know they're going to do that thing, and they don't have the resilience to maintain relationships without that thing. So you have to have both, I think.
You've spoken about lacking a sense of belonging in your childhood, and in particular, the challenge of being what seems like the primary care for your mom who is struggling with illness through your childhood. Did you ultimately find that sense of belonging in lineups or in surf culture at all?
Yeah, so I think that I have a sense of belonging now. I have a really incredible surf community. Part of that surf community is the Ride a Wave community. It's a group of people who selflessly volunteer to take kids, and often we do adults too. It actually started out with adults, but adults with disabilities out on the water, and just to play with them, surf, kayak, boogie board, just give them a day on the beach. And we started, Mike and I, when we first moved here, we started building that community, and it's just this really, I feel like I belong. That's where I feel like I belong. And in the water now, like, I've been around here long enough, and I'm just having fun and loving being in the water. And I think that people recognize that, and I'm just accepted. And you know, everyone, hey, how's it going? You know, get to surf with my friends. So I definitely feel like I have that belonging now. It took a very long time.
And you've seen the culture change a lot too over the last couple of decades.
Yes, I think the culture changed, more accepting towards having women in the water. It was important. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thing to hear. It's certainly the same in our area with numbers of women surfing and lineups just feeling different now in a better way, largely. It's nice.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, because it was so interesting. I had a conversation with a friend not too long ago, and I learned something that I didn't know about, I wasn't aware of. So when I started surfing and could actually get to my feet and go down the line and actually like knew where I was in the lineup, I started going to a secret spot that's pretty heavy actually in the area that I lived in. And initially I was treated like everybody else. Like, my leash was pulled, I was splashed in the face, get out of here, but I wanted to surf there. It was like this incredibly beautiful place. The waves were really good, less crowded, obviously, because of the people that protected the place. And I showed up, and, you know, if everybody was getting in the water at 6:30, I got in the water at 6. And I was in the water before them. And when they came out in the water, I just moved away. And then eventually it was like, I was accepted. Okay. And then it was like, okay, now I'm treated like not one of the boys, but they looked out for me. And if anybody gave me trouble, they looked out for me. And one of the things that I didn't appreciate was how my presence was actually intrusive to this tight-knit group of men who were doing the same thing I was trying to do, get away, probably from their wives or whatever lives they had. And here comes this girl, like, great, now we got to straighten up, you know? And so my friend actually said, he goes, hey, we were always stoked when you paddled out, because it was like this, like, actually the way one of the guys in the water described it is like, it's just a bunch of hungry dogs at a one food bowl. There's not enough food, and they're barking and they're biting, and it's just, oh. And when I paddled out, everyone was like, oh, here comes Sarah. Like, we gotta stop cussing, like, you know, none of this locker room stuff. And they stopped fighting, and everything was fine. And I didn't know that. And, you know, looking back 30 years later, I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. And I also appreciate their perspective of like, how we gotta like act different because this girl shows up, you know? And then they did act different. And they were the ones who helped me surf this really crazy wave. And then there were some other like kind of bigger wave spots. And like, hey, you can surf that wave, and you can surf that wave, and you need a bigger board, and you need this. And so they were the ones who were helping me in my pursuit of surfing bigger waves. And yeah.
I find people who are called to surf bigger waves so fascinating, I guess because I'm not at all. My mom has been quite unwell for the last few years. She's an amputee and has had quite a few physical challenges. And I often feel into her lack of being able to be physical as motivation to stay hyper physical in my own life. Does that resonate with you? Was that an experience you felt or have felt over the years with your mom's health struggles?
Yeah, I certainly don't take my health for granted. And something that's so beautiful about my mom is that she was very active when she was young. She played football with the boys, and she rode horses, and she did all this stuff. But she had a genetic neuro and muscular disease that ended up making her quadriplegic. So there she was, stuck in a wheelchair with two girls. I have ADHD. I was super hyperactive as a kid. And so, she's like, all right, we're going camping all summer. So we would go outside and literally set up a tent the day school got out, and 2 days before school got back in, we would go back home. And so I was able to just be wild and free, and my mom encouraged everything that I did, and she would just listen to me. When I got my first big waves, I would come home, she's like, what was it like? Tell me every detail. And I was trying to explain to her how about going through the wave when I first learned to duck dive. That amazing feeling? It actually works. And you don't get sucked back over. I was telling her about that and just the way it felt. And she just, she really enjoyed it. And seeing her be kind of stuck and unable to do the things she wanted to do, I constantly have that in my mind that will never take for granted that I can get up and move and experience life through my body. It's really powerful.
Yeah, it's huge.
If you've enjoyed listening to the conversation so far, consider also subscribing to Water People on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It'll help other people find the show. And if you're feeling inspired, leave us a review. We love hearing from you. And now a word from the folks who help make the podcast possible. Patagonia is in business to save our home planet. Founded by Yvonne Chenard in 1973, Patagonia is a surf and outdoor apparel company based in Ventura, California. As a certified B Corp and a founding member of 1% for the Planet, the company is recognized internationally for its product quality and environmental activism, as well as its contributions of nearly $230 million to environmental organizations. Its unique ownership structure reflects that the Earth is its only shareholder. Profits not reinvested back into the business are paid as dividends to protect the planet. Learn more at patagonia.com.au. Our ancestors drank natural water from streams, rivers, and waterfalls, but most of us don't have access to readily available natural drinking water anymore. Primal Water by Alkaway is an at-home water filter that mimics nature and is boosted with molecular hydrogen. It's a game changer. The team at Alkaway are on a mission to reduce harm caused by tap water and plastic bottled water. They're currently working to protect World Heritage listed Springbrook Falls, just up the road from us, which is under threat from water mining. Feel alive with Primal Water and support the work to protect precious places like Springbrook. Head to alkaway.com and use the code WATERPEOPLE, one word, for $100 off your purchase until June 30th or $50 off after June 30th, 2025. Primal Water by Alkaway.
I'm aware of many, many directions we can go in our conversation, and where you were just leading us there with health and personal health makes me think of, personal and planetary health, and something that we saw of you recently that really lit me up was you featured in the documentary The Big Sea, and this is an incredible expose on the reality of the wetsuits that we all have taken for granted for so many decades and used, and not really known the full story about the true nature of the suits we wrap ourselves in. And you were on the shore in the film drawing out the elements, the chemical elements that go into making neoprene on the sand. And I was so excited to see that, because not only was it so beautifully communicated the way you were doing that, and doing that visually for someone like myself was really helpful, but it also was an echo of something that has been in the collective consciousness of people in Australia the last few years through an Indigenous man, Tyson Yunkaporta, who wrote a book called Sand Talk. and he's a lecturer at one of the main universities in Australia, and he walks in both worlds here, in the whitefellow world and in the Indigenous community. But his book is called Sand Talk because in that culture, people will often be sitting on country out in the living world, drawing the ideas and the lessons and the thoughts, concepts in the sand for each other. And if they don't get it right, they'll brush the sand aside, start again and draw. And I just can't help but think that surfers all over the world similarly do that with each other. And not all of us are drawing out chemical equations like you were there in the film, but we do often sit there and we'll draw something in the sand to teach our kids or impart an idea to each other. Anyway, I just wanted to say that is just masterful and so beautiful, and it would be great if we could dive into that topic right now.
Specifically here in Oz, it's autumn. A lot of us are dusting off our wetsuits from last season. Hopefully they've made it to another season. And some of us are maybe looking for new suits this year, and there are a lot of options. Specifically in the film, you address the construction of limestone-based neoprene, and you address the fallacy of it being a less impactful or better option. Can you speak to that for us?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it was so interesting when Chris reached out to me and said, hey, we're doing this film. Could you talk about the chemistry behind neoprene? And I thought, yeah, I can. I did a minor in polymers and coatings when I was an undergrad. It's been a long time, but I was just kind of brushing through my stuff again. And one of the things that struck me is how little we talked about the toxicity of the molecules that were being created, how little we talked about forever chemicals. And that term wasn't even around, right? And here's these companies that are just churning out all these new molecules that we don't know how they react with each other, with human beings. And so I was kind of pondering on that. And I went back and I looked through my chemistry, and I saw the pathway very clearly. There's a paper published in like 1930 something about why you want to use a chlorinated instead of just regular carbons, why you want to put a chlorine on, and how it improves the stability and the reactivity and all that stuff of the actual product, which is the neoprene product that we use, or called polyprene. But it was difficult to find information about the geoprene, which is the limestone wetsuit, right? The calcium carbonate. And I thought, well, that's kind of funny. I wonder why I can't find out more about that. And I just pondered for a while. So limestone is calcium carbon with 3 oxygens, right? And it has 1 carbon in it. And you have to think of, well, what is polypropylene or neoprene? It is thousands of carbons strung together, like long strands, right? And then heated so that there's a cross-linking. So the thermoplastic, it's actually an elastic plastic. They're called elastomers. It's not classified as a plastic, but it kind of is. It's an elastic plastic. So I was thinking, where are they getting the extra carbon from? Like, how are they doing this? So limestone is very, very stable, right? It has to be mined. So you have to go and you have to mine it. So they say, oh, there's no fossil fuels involved. Well, what are you fueling your tractor and your mining equipment with, right? Oh, fossil fuels, right? So you have to mine the limestone and then you have to purify it. It has to go under extreme heat and pressure to eventually make a calcium carbide. They also have to add coke. So coke is like coal. It's coal that's been treated. So some of the impurities in coal are no longer there, but it's basically a carbon source. So where are they getting that from? Well, they're mining it from somewhere. And there are impurities in it. There can be sulfur impurities. There can be mostly sulfur and nitrogen impurities, which end up going into the atmosphere as what we call them NOx and SOx. So nitrogen, oxygen combinations. That's why you get the little X. Or SOx, which is sulfur oxygen combinations. They go up into the atmosphere, they react with water, and they come back down as acid rain, nitric acid, sulfuric acid. Or they are smog, like nitrogen dioxide or tetranitrogen tetroxide. So dinitrogen tetroxide. So these impurities are ending up in the atmosphere, right? Coming from the coke. And those have to be combined under high pressure situations. And then you end up with acetylene. And then you can add the chlorine through hydrochloric acid. And then it does a little cool arrangement. And you end up with the same precursor molecule that you end up the other way using petroleum. And then that can be polymerized, right? So it's not this like super eco groovy material. And you still end up with the same material, which unfortunately cannot be recycled. There's no way to recycle it. All you can do is grind it up into finer, smaller pieces and hopefully repackage it as something else. It can't be broken down into its elements again. That's the problem. So like aluminum cans, I can get the aluminum back. Glass, I can get the silicon dioxide back. There's things I can actually get back to the atoms, and I can't do that with the wetsuit material. Right now, we can't do that. So, yeah.
Okay, so that's the branch, that's the limestone branch of the wetsuit tree. What about the ULX plant-based branch? What are we looking at when we look at that option and its chemical composition?
Well, I've been learning about it. So it's interesting. The first time I ever learned about ULX and rubbers and why it was so cool that we had all the synthetics is that ULX is so that's a brand name for a natural rubber that comes from a tree, right? And it's coming from a tree from South America. There's also, it can grow in Arizona and areas like that. So the first time I learned about it was basically books that were saying like, yeah, there's these plantations and, the native people, the indigenous people are treated terribly. And, there's clear cutting to plant these trees and it's not very efficient. And you gotta, don't use that. Use the synthetic. It's much better. But now looking at it, we realize that the trees naturally produce a gum, right? So it's a natural kind of rubber material. It does have to be processed in order to make the neoprene, but it's minimally processed. The rubber is the trees are certified so that they're certified farms. So you can track where the rubber is coming from, the natural rubber, and you can, they're not clear cutting forests in order to make these plantations. And the cool thing is that I believe it's Patagonia who did it, was able to figure out how to get that natural rubber back to what's called carbon black so they can actually go right back into making more wetsuits. So it's definitely renewable in that sense. The reality is, though, let's just face it. We, as human beings, require energy, and we are going to have an impact on the earth. So how do we choose the least impact? How do we choose a path that cares for the planet and cares for ourselves and cares for other people? I would say a natural path, hopefully. If it grows on trees and it can be renewed and reused, that's better. But the reality is it's gonna require energy. Yeah. Right? Everything does. And we haven't even talked about surfboards yet. Right? Yes. So, true. And I think that we can exist on this planet in a way that cares for other people and cares for this planet. And our interaction being in the water is part of that, right? As we interact with the ocean, we can become stewards of the ocean, protecting the spaces that we love. So I'm part of Save the Waves, and we're really hoping to protect the whole surf ecosystem. And when we engage in something and we love something, we become protectors and we hopefully give back. And we also are takers.
Yeah. I think part of the change that feels like it needs to happen too is thinking about what we accept as innovation. I was just reading about the wristbands on Apple Watches and similar, and how probably they are full of forever chemicals of PFAS to make them waterproof and so durable. And I guess as consumers now, it's our job to say, actually, that's not an innovation that we're going to celebrate. because the impact is so much greater than its very, very finite usage.
Yeah, I think that the thing that's challenging for us as consumers is that because of secrets like chemical secrets, proprietary secrets, and those kinds of things, companies don't have to tell us what's in the materials and what we consume. I mean, I've looked at just even soap, dishwasher soap or whatever at the grocery store, and they don't say what's in there. Like, what's in here? They don't say. 99% of some other stuff. What is it? You don't have to say. And you really have to dig and educate yourself, and that's exhausting. But we have to, right? We have to. And I think we also have to try to lobby for protective rules and policies. So like the Green Science Policy Institute that Arlene Bloom founded is doing a lot of really good work and educating consumers, saying, hey, this isn't safe, this isn't right.
Yeah, that makes me think of the peer review system in the science community. And that the way I see it, that's like Western culture's version of running an idea through your community before you adopt it and adapt with that new revelation or approach to life. And I love that idea that in the science community you'll have an idea, you'll pursue it, a question, you'll answer that question, and you'll run your findings through other people. And I feel like right now in such an internet age where there's so many individuals who can spout a single person's perspective and idea and then kind of preach it as the way things are, I have a bit of a problem with that, because I feel like it hasn't run through your aunties and uncles, your elders, your kids. It hasn't gone through that process. And I just wondered if that was something you enjoy with the work you do and the community you're in with teaching and studying, and just the value of that at this point in time.
You're absolutely right that learning and science from an academic perspective is all about peer review and working with other scientists and exploring and being curious. And that process is super important for publications. The process in terms of industry is different. Well, they will be super tight and they will hide their industrial secrets. And then when they find something, they'll patent it. And that patent isn't a publication that's peer reviewed. You do have patent review, and that patent review basically says, is this molecule that you made or is this method you made really different from all the other things? And if so, we give you the patent and then you can make money on it. The peer review from external scientists maybe happens later when someone says, hey, what's going on with this molecule here? Why are we seeing, super high cancer rates? Or why does every cat around here have a thyroid disease? Like, what's going on? And then that's brought into academia, and then that process happens. And it's a really important process. And I think that like absolutely what you said, now you can have one person be an influencer and they can just spout whatever they want to. And then, your 10-year-old or whoever, mostly 10-year-olds, young kids are watching this and they're like, yep, that's the truth. That's the truth. That's the truth. So how do we learn to filter what is true, as we can tell in science, right? How do we know what is true, right? How do we know what we know, right? We should go through this whole process. And it's not just the scientific process, right? The scientific process does like to take things apart. There's other ways of knowing, the traditional ways of knowing, storytelling, right? Living, coexisting in nature. And if we can bring all of those aspects together, then I think we can live a more peaceful life and a healthier life for ourselves and for the planet. And there's a lot of push for that. There is. And then there's the capitalist kind of greedy, like, I don't care what happens to you. I'm going to make some money. And yeah, we got to push back against that.
That's so wonderfully said. I really appreciate that. I think that's, really a wonderful perspective to share. And it makes me excited that, the response to those, I guess, corporate practices that are so murky and shadowy and hidden and exclusive. I like that the response to that is us having relationships that are strong. It's you sitting on the other side of the Pacific over there right now, talking to us, looking west, and we're down here in the bottom of the planet, and there's a connectivity happening, and it just makes these sort of conversations, and anyone we can have with friends in our network, which is largely coastal community, people around the world, so important. It just feels really important to have these conversations and to see things like the big sea, and that is a removal of that veil, that layer of secrecy and unknowing and hiding and really dishonorable behavior. From that, we can start to do better. That's a good feeling. That's a good thing that we're experiencing right now. And similarly to how you were describing lineups yesteryear and maybe them being more closed down and just one certain way, and it was very exclusive feeling, that's changing too, and that's surely a healthy thing. It's just a point. I felt that when you were talking, and it's something to be grateful for right now.
Yeah, there's so much to be grateful for. And I see that there's always the challenge of the aspect of human nature that is greedy and wanting more for self. It is tribalistic, more and more, and like us, them. There's always that aspect going, but it's not an aspect that we have to choose to live in. We can choose to live in another way. And, surfing for me is living in the other way. So I know that I'm going to love being in the water in the day, and I can approach the surf and say, what's my goal? Oh, it's to be joyful. It's to be in community with my friends. It's to see somebody else get a good wave, and to make a conscious decision to make a human connection. And then also to make that kind of like rinse off and like refocus, because our culture seems to me to really be pushing towards individualism and get what you can, and you have to be the famous one, or you have to be the sexy one, or you have to be the rich one. And the only way we can push back against that is to wake up and go, whoa, 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 I don't have to take that. I don't have to be that. I can coexist with my space, with my ocean, with my people in the water who show up. And it's a practice, and it's a pushback. And one of the things that was challenging for me as a surfer is that I was the only surfer in my family. My mom obviously couldn't. My dad, I had to rescue him a couple of times. I just put it that way on the ocean. Hey, Dad, you're in a rip. Let me help you swim back. And my sister loved the mountains, and so she was 5 years older. But every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, it was like the surf was good, and I had to go sit with my boring family, eat bad food, and miss it. And I was like the bad person if I didn't show up, right? You know what I'm talking about,
yes,
right?
We do.
Can relate.
Yes. And I got the guilt trips, man. Oh, so much guilt. And then I kind of carried that guilt with me. Like, oh, if I'm not like showing up and doing everything I'm supposed to be doing and being responsible, I'm a loser and I can't go surf. And then one day I realized, you know what? If I don't go surf, I'm not going to be the person I want to be anyway. I'm not going to be able to show up how I want to show up. And part of being in the water is taking a stand against the cultural expectations and being like, hey, I'm going to go rinse off. I'm going to take care of myself, because there's no way I'm going to be able to love my neighbor of myself if I don't go surf and I don't love myself. So it's like this super important choice to be in the water, be in community with people, be renewed. Okay, I can think clearly. I know where my center is. I know where my ground is. And so for anyone who's like, feeling guilty or whatever, it's like, get in the water. Just go rinse off. You'll feel a lot better, and everyone's going to be happier afterwards anyway. So
I love that clarity, and I love that reminder to take a moment and really ask, like, why am I doing this thing? Why am I going into the water? Is it just a habit that I've built into my life over time, or does it like fill me with energy or something that I can't get anywhere else? How does it contribute to making me a better version of myself? I feel like we can all relate to that. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely me.
Yeah.
Sarah, you alluded to surfing as a practice and your spirituality as a practice. And you're also this incredible woman of science. And I was wondering, do you see your scientific and your spiritual selves as parallel parts of yourself or as something else?
That's a really great question. When I was younger, I just felt like I had this split personality. I just felt like I was in so many different worlds. I went to church, went into a lab, I did scientific research, and I went surfing. And these worlds did not overlap very much. Maybe I knew one person at church who surfed, or maybe there was one person in the lab who wanted to surf or something. And I thought I was actually quite torn because I loved every aspect of my curiosity, and I wanted to participate in a community of people who were exploring who is God, or what does this mean? And I wanted to learn more about chemistry. I just wanted to be in the lab, but I also wanted to be in the water. So how do I put all these pieces together? The thing that I realized is that, there are many parts of me. I think that there's something called interfamily systems, IFS, which is a view of ourselves as many parts, right? Many parts to the whole. I really identify with that. And that each part of myself needs care and is worthy of being there, right? There was a long time I was like, oh, you can't surf, you have to go to work and prove that you're, a scientist. I mean, I can't tell you how many people, especially in grad school, could not figure me out. They were like, who is this person? I show up in the wet and and, I lean over, water dripping out of my nose and, and they're like, God, who is this person? And then much later, they were like, oh, that's Sarah. That's the famous surfer. It's funny now. I just had to say, hey, I'm all of this. This is all of me. And the really important thread that runs through all of it is curiosity. I am just so curious. I want to explore this life and this body that I've been given, that I can stand up on a surfboard and, go swim. I want to explore what I can explore with my mind. I want to explore the mysteries of this life. I mean, science is cool. It's really cool. But there's this whole other aspect of life that what about God? What about the mysteries that we can't explain, Science only goes so far. And to me, it almost is like uncovering the mysteries of this beautiful creation. And it's so fascinating. And so all of it now, as I'm 50, I can kind of go, oh, I see how that plays out. And I honor that part of myself that needs to move. This is the way I'm genetically made. I have ADHD. If I'm going to focus all day long in a classroom, I need to move. I just know that about myself. And guess what? I'm going to go move, And that might be, yesterday I had to be at school at 7:25 in the morning. So I surfed from 5:55 to 6:30 and I got to school on time, right? And today I didn't have to go into school till later. So I got up early. I wrote in my journal. I read the Bible. I hung out with my husband. And then I went and matted. And then I went to school, like all these little things. And just, that's the beauty of this life, right? The mystery of we finding out who we are and how we can interact. And I just think that we should always be curious and be willing to challenge ourselves and our assumptions and be wrong and learn.
Speaking of moving and curiosity, you mentioned earlier that you are preparing for a sabbatical. How will you be spending it?
Oh, I'm so excited. Yeah, so I'm really excited. I have the opportunity to work on curriculum for one of our classes. So we have an introductory class, chemistry class for allied health majors. These are students who will be going into nursing, dental hygiene, or radiology technician. And often these students have never had chemistry before. And what I found was that the younger students, maybe straight out of high school, 18 to 20, just don't do as well as the older students do. As a matter of fact, sometimes the older students' success rates, 80%, 90%, they get really high. And then the younger students, 50%, 60% are passing the class. And then also we have probably in the allied health chemistry classes, sometimes upwards of 70% of our students are from Latinx countries or Latino countries. So Mexico, Central America, mostly Central America, some South America. Either they're first gen in college or maybe they're first generation born here. And they also don't do as well as other students. So my goal is to write the curriculum in a way that relates to what younger people are interested in. So I'm just thinking about, what do people care about? So like, I'm not exactly sure what I'm gonna call it, but it might be like matter matters. I don't know, because chemistry has to do with matter. I don't know, it's dorky. And then also to be able to learn to speak Spanish again. So I can help my students that I hear asking questions in English when they're asking like, what does this mean? How do I do this? What do I do? But when I have students who are talking to each other in Spanish, I don't know if they're talking about like the last party they went to or like, what am I supposed to do right now? And so I can't help them, unless they're speaking in English and I can hear what they're saying and then I can interject and be like, oh, mix these things or this product is this, Oh yeah, and do a bunch of math stuff because, it's the math also. Students haven't had algebra in ages or can't remember how to graph stuff. And so I have an idea to make a bunch of math videos that are contextualized in terms of chemistry. So I'll do that. And then for the Spanish component, I have a friend who's been going to Nicaragua for years. And there's a little surf town there. There's a Spanish language school. There's a library there that I can volunteer. And so that's the first part. And then there is and of course there's good surf.
Yeah.
Don't tell me that. That's not part of the sabbatical proposal.
No,
they don't know about the sabbatical. Like, where's a good surf? So I shall be learning Spanish. One of my friends called it a surfatical. I'm like, yeah. So I'll be doing that a little. And then I'm also going to spend a month in Baja. There's a university near San Miguel, so right by Todos Santos. I've never surfed there. It is on a bucket list. I'm going to bring a gun and hopefully surf. But it's in San Miguel, and I've been speaking with the faculty there so that I can basically audit a general chemistry class that's taught in Spanish. So that I can learn how to basically learn best teaching practices from them to their Spanish-speaking students. And then I can also tutor. So for that month. So that should be good. And then, just a bunch of like hopefully updating this class and making it really interesting, really accessible with a bunch of support to increase the success rates for my students. That's the goal.
I hear a lot of service baked into your sabbatical. I've heard you speak about open-handed living. I'd love for you to maybe close us out by talking us through what that means philosophically for you and who inspired that approach.
Yeah, sure. So my sister is, like I said, she's 5 years older than me, and she has been such an incredible role model for me and a life for me. And we talk often and go back and forth about how we're coping and what we're doing and how we can help each other and how do we make it through these challenges, right? And she was the first one to introduce me to this idea of living open-handedly. It's basically not grasping, right? And in yoga also, they have this idea of non-grasping, right? You're not grasping with everything you have. It's feel it in your body, be present, don't try to control everything, and whatever will be. And that idea was super helpful for me because I, for a very long time, was grasping with surfing. I was like, basically had this time in my life where I was like, if I don't surf, I am not going to be okay. I'm not going to be able to function. It was the only coping strategy I had to deal with stress and anxiety and depression. And so, I thought, okay, if I don't let go of this tension inside of me around whether I get in the water or not, I'm just going to explode. And she was the one to say, you have to let it be open-handed. And another, a friend of mine who's a chemist actually, who doesn't surf, she's super wise. I saw her, I was coming out of the water And she was walking by and we were just talking, and I'm like, oh, this surfing thing's such a curse sometimes. And the reason I was doing that, you know, I had those moments where you're like, you should have been here an hour ago. You're like, I couldn't get here an hour ago. I don't want to hear about it. I don't care how good it was. So I was just having that struggle. Like, I couldn't get things to line up and get in the water, and I was just frustrated. So here I am coming out of the water, frustrated. It's just a curse. And she looked at me and she's like, are you kidding me? Every time you get in the water is a blessing. And I just at that moment had this clarity of like, oh my gosh, here's the perspective of someone who will never get in the water like I do, who sits at the top of the cliffs and watches all those surfers. And I get to be out there? Like, how am I holding on to this so tight that I'm calling it a curse? It's like, no. Open-handed, when the stars align, so to speak, if I can get in the water, I will receive it as a blessing and I will be grateful. And if I can't, I will receive it as a blessing and I will be grateful for all the waves I've ever had.
Time is precious. Thanks for spending some of yours listening with us today. Our editor this season is the multi-talented Ben Jake Alexander. The soundtrack was composed by Shannon Soul Carroll, with additional tunes by Dave and Ben. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcast. And you can subscribe to our very infrequent newsletter to get book recommendations, questions we're pondering, behind-the-scenes glimpses into recording the podcast, and more via our website, waterpeoplepodcast.com.